Welcome aboard.
Please welcome to the stage Axios Pro Tech Policy Reporter Maria Curie.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here bright and early. We will be discussing the current state of public opinion around AI today and the future of its oversight. Please help me in welcoming our first guest. He is the Chief of Staff and Deputy Director for Strategy at the White House, Office of Science and Technology Policy, Asad Ramzan-Ali. Hello, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so Asad, next month we are going to be coming up on a year of the executive order on AI's rollout. Could you talk to us about what the greatest impact of that executive order has been and what work is left to do once that implementation is done?
Sure. And thanks for having me. As many of you hopefully already know, the Biden-Harris administration has been very active on AI. We started with a set of voluntary commitments with companies on safety. We had an executive order, as you mentioned. We've had a number of how does AI work in government type of policies. Now, to the executive order itself, it is a very broad executive order because AI is broad. AI hits so many different parts of society, of our lives. I was re-noticing the name of this event, The People's View. What I'm most proud of in that EO is how many of the things impact people. So let me give you a couple of quick examples. One is the CFPB made clear that if you're denied a loan from a mortgage or a lending application that uses AI, uses algorithms, you have a right to know, why was I denied? That is a thing that impacts real people today. That is live in the world. It is not a proposal. HHS has made clear that if there is a system that is impacting your healthcare that uses AI, it cannot discriminate against protected classes, just like that exists in a legal framework offline. And so those are real things that impact real people and solve real problems. I'm proud of that. I'm also proud of the fact that something called the NAIR, I see a NAIR t-shirt here in the crowd, the National AI Research Resource, we started a pilot to enable not just the largest companies, but researchers and small businesses and students to have access to the compute and data for AI. So we've done a lot. But what you'll notice every quarter when we put out a where are we on the EO, all of the tasks that have been out there have been on time, they've been high quality, and we're proud of them.
What do you think remains to be done after that document is kind of set and done?
Well, so implementing that is our top priority. There's a lot to be done well after a deadline is met and the first step happens. There's going to continue to be, so one example, one assignment in the EO was for the Office of Management and Budget to implement a management memo. Now that management memo is itself a huge policy lift that's going to require a lot of work, that is requiring a lot of work of agencies. And so our job continues to be to make sure that's implemented in a way that's thoughtful, that respects rights, that advances the values that we have.
Right, and even though we're in an election year and one of the main candidates is saying that they would completely overturn this executive order, it's important to know that a lot of it already will be implemented if that time does come. And separately from the executive order, the administration recently got tech companies to commit to voluntary commitments to combat online sexual abuse material. Can you talk to us about that effort, why it's important, and then what are its limits to voluntary commitments?
Let me start with your second part. Voluntary commitments are something where we can move quickly to solve a problem that we see in the real world, but it doesn't have the force of law. So we're hopeful, and the president has called on Congress to move towards laws in areas like protecting children, protecting privacy, protecting women and girls online. And so to the last one, we used to talk a year and a half ago of what risks are there that are going to be exacerbated by the wave of AI we're seeing. We're now in a place where we're seeing harms. Those risks have manifested to real world harms. And the one place we've seen that accelerated most is the harm to women, girls, queer people online. That's a real thing where you see image-based sexual abuse harming these people or destroying lives. So we moved to work with companies to actually start to solve this problem. So one example is a nonprofit called Common Crawl that helps develop the data sets that AI systems are trained on. They've committed, for example, to remove known instances of image-based sexual abuse from their data sets so that when an AI system is built, that's not part of its training. That's a big deal. We feel good about that.
Right, right. And there are some measures on Capitol Hill to also address this issue, some of which don't really require any tech liability. What's your position on that? Can this issue be addressed without making the tech platforms themselves liable?
So I think there's a lot of ways of combating this issue, and I think there's a lot of ways of going at this issue, but it's also one where there's a lot of conversations around what is AI legislation, what do we need to do. Mm-hmm. I think we should start from what are the harms and the risks that we're trying to address, and there's a lot of ways of approaching these things. So you could do it through liability, you could do it through other mechanisms, and I'm not one that's watching every single bill all the time, but I'm hopeful that we move on a problem like this.
Got it. And you also worked on Capitol Hill yourself. You worked for Representative Anna Eshoo as well as Senator Brian Schatz. Can you draw on that personal experience and kind of talk us through why it's so difficult for Congress to move on any tech bills?
I think you have to start from the perspective that doing big things is hard. Doing big things is never going to be easy in a country as large and diverse as we are. That is the inherent structure of where we start. Now, that's not an excuse. That's just the feature of where we are. That said, I struggle with answering your question of like why it's been hard. But I do look forward and say I'm I'm optimistic that we can actually move on privacy on a number of these things where we've gotten close. And it takes just a little bit more to get done. So everything when it's done looks like it was an overnight success, and I'm sure whatever bill moves will. Mm-hmm. But of course, it will have been built on decades of work.
Yeah, and there are some people, including some members of Congress, that say it's because of tech lobbying that bills don't move. What do you think about that argument?
I think there's some legitimacy to it. I think there's always going to be companies that want to push back on how they're regulated, whether they're regulated. But it is our job as policymakers to think about the public policy implications and weigh that out and move forward to what's right for the country.
Got it. So like I mentioned, we are in an election year. What is your biggest concern when it comes to AI regulation under a potential Trump administration?
So I am, of course, a government employee governed by the Hatch Act and have limits on what I can say before a lawyer calls me and is really upset. The thing I can say is I work in science and technology. Under this administration, under President Biden, under Vice President Harris, we have used the values of science and technology, which are finding truth, using facts, using innovation to improve the future and the country and the state of the world. We've done that well. We have made progress on climate. The president passed the CHIPS and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest ever climate action. We feel good about that. We feel good about what we've done in AI. You don't have to pontificate to look back to the prior administration and look at how facts were misused, debunked reports were used to harm health, to harm climate. To me, I look at what we've done and I'm proud of that.
How would you describe the differences between the Biden administration's approach to AI regulation versus a potential Harris administration? Are those differences starting to crystallize for you, and what would they be?
So I can't speak for the campaign. What I can say at every step of voluntary commitments, of the executive order, of the Office of Management and Budget memo that impacts how agencies use AI, the vice president's been there and leading all along. The president's been there and leading all along. So they've been partnering on each one of these steps. The vice president and her team have been wonderful partners throughout in every step of the way. So I can't speak for the campaign and how they're going to view these issues, but I think this has been a wonderful partnership so far.
Do you think it does give her an edge that she's from California and so familiar with Silicon Valley?
I think if you look at her past work as senator from California, as attorney general, these issues are not new to her. And when you look at her and when she talks about AI, when she talks about these issues, she starts with harms to people. because that's who she is. And so it's been wonderful to see her start from what does this mean for consumers? What does it mean for girls? What does it mean for seniors? That's the approach we should take to these issues.
Yeah. And there are a lot of lawmakers on Capitol Hill who are waiting to see how existing laws can be leveraged to counter some of these harms from AI that could come. And the executive order, of course, relies on these existing laws. Is that enough in your view, for example, in the space of civil rights, or are there gaps that need to be filled with new laws?
Yeah, many of you may have seen last year 4 regulatory agencies led by the Department of Justice put out a statement that basically said there's not an AI loophole to existing laws. If something was illegal, using AI doesn't somehow wash that away. That said, I think the analysis has to be not just is in general discrimination illegal? Of course it is, and I'm proud that our regulatory agencies have taken that seriously. I think we have to look at a use case by use case analysis of when AI is used in this specific way, does the law cover that? Do the regulatory agencies, not only is it illegal, is it against the law when it should be, do the regulatory agencies have the authority and the expertise they need to be able to monitor that and to be able to go after it? So that's the kind of next steps that I think happen in implementation that's really important, but won't have the buzzy headline of like, we did an inventory and we did an analysis.
What about the funding? These agencies have so much more work to do now, and Congress right now is in the middle of funding the government, but of course you have a House of Representatives that is very hesitant to spend any more money. Why is it important to fund these agencies?
There's not a way to do this work without hiring technical staff, without hiring lawyers, without hiring ethicists. So hiring people costs money. And so from where I sit, it is important to enable the regulatory agencies to do their jobs. But we've talked a lot about risk. Let me also say it is important that our country uses AI for all of the good that it can do and for all the public missions that we have as a country. We need to invest in research and development. We need to invest in deploying. And so when I look at our research and development infrastructure and the agencies that do that, this president has done an amazing job bringing along and increasing the budgets for research and development, but we have to build on that. We have to go big with AI, and that's going to be an investment, and that's worth doing.
Right, and what do you make of the argument that it's a matter of just using the money that's already out there more wisely?
When we have a big shift like AI, it's important to rethink what's needed. So I think it is fair to say what money exists that can be reused. So when we look at some of the things we've done so far, that has not come with a huge increase in appropriations for all the agencies that are doing all the work that we just talked through. Agencies are sprinting, they are using whatever they can. And to continue to lead in the world. It's not just can we find a little bit more here or there? We're going to have to invest.
Yeah. And so we're here talking about public opinion on AI. In your view, do you think enough Americans are connecting the dots between this, tech revolution with new jobs and economic growth that could impact their families directly? Do you think that message is resonating?
I think some do. I think we need to continue to tell the story of how those jobs appear, and it manifests in many different ways. When a data center gets built, those are jobs that in construction and plumbing and electricians, and so we have to talk through what that means. We have to talk through the fears that people have about jobs too, and we have to be thoughtful about how to approach those and have policy solutions that, again, help people.
Yeah. Do you have ideas for how the government can do that?
I think we've done a number of things. I think we're at the stage of studying how it looks and what we should be doing. So the Department of Labor has done some work there. They've also put out principles on not just what it means for workers, but how employers should or shouldn't be using AI in the workplace. So those are the kinds of things that we've been doing.
Yeah, and then in terms of the fear, whether it's around elections or deep fakes, or these online images of their children and families, what would your message be to them?
It is really difficult when a technological misuse of technology harms people, and we should start with the victims of those harms and understand what they need and how we can be helpful to them. And then we should look at the systems that enabled that and try to reduce those harms. And so to me, these are policy questions that start from individual people, individual harms, and we should always center that question and those people, and then go to solutions.
Yeah. So you are also you also work on climate science. That's part of your portfolio. What was your takeaway from UNGA and whether the world is ready to really leverage technology to combat climate change?
Yeah, so I'm obviously here, not in New York, but I have many colleagues who are up there, and I was talking to some of them yesterday evening. One of the things that we were actually talking about is the intersection of climate and energy questions and AI, and a lot of our team's been working on that. And one of the things that they commented to me on was the sophistication of that conversation and how many different actors are ready to actually make moves and start talking about what does it mean for utilities, what does it mean for electrical grids. So look, this president, to go back to your main question, has taken more actions on climate, and I'm proud of the amount of clean energy we've deployed. Those are huge, impressive moves. There's going to be more to do, but I'm really proud of where we've gotten.
Yeah. So last question, one fun thing. How do you use AI? What's your favorite way of using it?
I think like many of you, every time there's a new release of ChatGPT or Claude or any of these, I spend the weekend trying to do things and fool it with the number of R's in strawberry or anything else that comes up. So I've been of the let me just kind of play with the technology, because otherwise you can't understand it truly.
For sure. All right. Well, that is all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great job. Okay, so up next, we have the president and CEO of the Center for Democracy and Technology, Alexandra Reeve Givens. Hi, Alex. Thanks for being here. Okay, so this is a very timely discussion because CDT just came out with a new report this morning. And this report says that millions of students across the country are experiencing non-consensual intimate imagery abuse. It concluded that schools are not doing enough. And I was wondering if you could briefly tell us about some of the other findings of this report to start.
Yeah, exactly right. So I'm glad that you were asking Assad about this too. When we think about the different risks that come from AI systems, the ways in which it's exacerbating existing harms we've seen for a long time around non-consentiment intimate imagery is an area that we're really focused on. Because of the ease, the cheapness, the easy availability of these tools, Nudify apps that you can just find in the App Store, we're seeing a significant uptick in teenagers doing this to one another, and many different news stories just capturing the devastating nature of this harm. We did a nationwide survey to look at the prevalence in schools and saw that a large number of students are experiencing this and finding are aware of it happening in their schools. But what was important for us wasn't just to scare people with a prevalence study, but really look at how schools are addressing these harms. And one of the things that we found is that they are going automatic to a disciplinary framework, which of course makes sense and is part of the playbook, but they are not resourced at all to focus on prevention and to focus on victim support. So how to help people that are experiencing this type of harm to get them the necessary supports that they need and create a culture of prevention in the schools. And so the way that we work through our education team is really trying to be a resource to those school officers so that we can create a better infrastructure of support for kids who are going through this.
Yeah, and what do these schools need specifically? Is it better training, more teachers, mental health professionals? How does that work?
All of the above, and it really fits with how society needs these tools as well, right? This is an area where, again, we're seeing increasing prevalence, but we don't often talk about this as a type of harm or really think about what the mitigation should be. At the school level, one of the things that we're focused on, again, is just getting teachers the resources they need to be able to look out for these types of harm, how to support kids as they're going through it. But then at the more macro level, CDT has also been working on non-consensual intimate imagery and image-based sexual abuse from a company perspective, too. You mentioned before the White House commitments that came out around the 30th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act earlier this month. We also released a similar set of multi-stakeholder commitments from many of the leading tech companies, as well as survivor advocates, on what effective design of technology companies' products can help mitigate these types of concerns as well.
So it's really about addressing the design features of these technology platforms. That's how you help address this issue.
Yeah, again, we need a cross-society's response, but when it's generative AI systems that are being used to create fake versions of these images, there are things we can do in the training data, as Assad was talking about, in the controls on the systems about what their outputs can be. The social media platforms continue to have an incredibly important responsibility in terms of taking down this content when it's surfaced and limiting the distribution. The app stores have a role to play when there are apps that are, literally marketing themselves as nudify apps. You can tell the nefarious intent, and they run counter to the terms of service of the app stores. The app stores need to be policing those and actually enforcing those policies. The same for search engines, the same for ad platforms.
Why should those platforms not be held legally accountable, or why should their Section 230 protections not be messed with?
So there are different legal interventions that you can push on here. One, for example, really focuses in, or a couple bills that are pending in Congress right now, focus in on the perpetrator. So the Defiance Act, which is a bill that passed out of the Senate by unanimous consent, currently pending in the House with strong bipartisan support, focuses on creating liability for people that are creating these types of images, even when they are quote unquote fake, but still cause harm to real people. The SHIELD Act does that through criminal penalties, which some people have complex feelings around, but is kind of another intervention point. For the social media platforms, look, it is obvious that they have an important role to play. There are interesting questions that come up around First Amendment protections and around the incentives created for companies. So, how are the legal mechanisms created? Does it create too much of an incentive for them to over-moderate content and take it down? The moment you start tinkering with 230, you do have an outside impact on users' individual speech. So there are careful factors that need to be balanced there with thoughtful policymaking. But overall, it's just important that we're having this conversation and are at the point now where people are talking about specific interventions.
Right. Why do you think this is an issue that impacts the LGBTQ community and women so much more than other parts of society?
Oh, that's a societal analysis question that, it is, when we see the types of exploitation and targeting that is happening, people, overwhelmingly focus on marginalized and minority communities and people that most stand to do it. When you see women, it's it's like 96% of, synthetic images online are nude images of women that have been artificially created. We also are seeing increasingly not only the revenge type harms that people have talked about before, but extortion schemes and blackmail schemes happening too. And a number of those high profile examples have involved members of the LGBTQ community because of societal stigma, because of all of the additional social burdens that are put on that community. People see that vulnerability and exploit it.
Right, and this is, obviously an area that does not help for the public's perception of AI, especially for families with young children. What do you make of the efforts right now on Capitol Hill to just protect kids online more, whether it's COSA or COPPA 2.0? These two bills are heating up on Capitol Hill. Is this another way to kind of get at, the public's perception of tech and social media?
Yeah, there's no question that kids' online safety has been a dominant theme in the conversation. And for good reason, again, we continue to see really important and shocking stories about kids who are experiencing online harassment, bullying, and don't have the resources to help them. So it's good to see that level of focus. I will say that for CDT, we have been very focused on privacy protections as one of the strongest interventions that we need to lean into. So we're glad that the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act is getting focus and renewal. We think everybody needs to have their privacy protected. We need a comprehensive federal privacy law that protects everyone, whether you're over the age of 13, 18, or anybody. In terms of the Kids Online Safety Act, that's been an ongoing effort over the past couple years. Some organizations, and ours is one of them, have raised concerns about how it's drafted to make sure that we're careful here. When we talk about a duty of care, when we talk about relatively abstract notions about what can count as a harm to minor, it is easy to tap into political currents in our society that could lead to over-censoring of speech of marginalized groups, kids trying to access information about gender-affirming care or reproductive care, and other areas like that. We are grateful that the sponsors of the bill have been listening to those concerns and making changes along the way. It remains an ongoing process for us as we try to make sure that we are reaching the objectives that they have, but not having an unintended side effect on marginalized communities around the country.
Yeah. So on the other side of this, there is also the benefits of these technologies for the very same groups that are facing some of the greatest harms, and that's a tricky balance for Congress to strike. So, we did talk a little bit about the voluntary commitments. Can you talk about the work that your organization is doing alongside the administration's voluntary commitments to combat these images?
Yeah, so for the 30th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act, we announced a big multi-stakeholder effort for voluntary commitments of different companies around how they are mitigating and preventing the spread, creation and spread of non-consensual intimate images. This came out of a working group that we began at the start of the summer, which has the major social media platforms, major generative AI companies, survivor advocates, trust and safety experts, digital health experts, all working together to identify best practices and then also come up with cross-industry solutions. One of the things that you will hear about the most is that survivors want an easy way of taking this junk down, right? If they find out that an image about them is circulating, they want a place to go to. That now exists. StopNCII.org is a really good resource. Not every company is participating. There may well be hurdles to what that is and how to make that tool work better. This is the type of space where we're trying to have those conversations. Yeah. You know, you talk to the companies and they all know that they would like to have deterrence messaging. Someone's putting in a query to create something and they want to do nudge behavior. How exactly do you write that? That shouldn't be a company engineer writing it in a vacuum. They need to be talking to the experts. How do you make sure that you have trauma-informed approaches? So there's a lot of common ground and work to do together here, and our vision is let's move out of the headlines, let's just have a quiet conversation between the people who are deep in this work to make it as effective as possible.
And how does this tool work to remove all of these images from the internet? Do you think the average person is aware of these tools? And, you know, if not, how do we get to that place?
So we need more awareness. That goes back to the resourcing in schools. We also need more technical development and investment. So the way that this works now, some in the audience may be familiar with the notion of hashing technology. Mm-hmm. So once an image has been identified as problematic, you can create a technical hash for that image and it can be shared with others so that they can identify the same photograph. They don't actually have to look at the content itself, which is important. The problem is, of course, with generative AI, you can create many different versions of an image that are just different enough that it makes the hashing technology very complex. So more work is needed in that space. More work is needed, of course, on just detection in general, including for AI-generated images. So there's research work to be done too, which is crucially important.
Do you think that this is a reason why the AI chatbots that we're seeing today should not have been developed and deployed so quickly? Or do you just think this was going to happen regardless, and we should just figure out how to fix it now that it's out in the world?
That's a complicated question because part of this technology being out in the world is leading to innovation, consumers actually spending time with this technology. I would take the chatbots kind of out of the NCII conversation because there are so many other uses for them as well that many people are experimenting with and having a lot of beneficial uses. Do we need more guardrails faster? Yes. Do these companies need to make sure they're investing in trust and safety work? Yes. Do they need to learn the lessons of the social media companies about the way that you develop trust and safety isn't just, again, your engineers and product counsel in a room by themselves, but through consultative processes, having detailed written policies, enforcing those policies, and then telling people about it so there's accountability? Yes, we need all of those things. We need them yesterday. And in some cases, relatively small companies are having to reach this maturity model very, very fast. That's what we're doing, is trying to encourage them and push them to get there as quickly as we can.
Right, and again, we're in an election year. I'm so curious how you think a potential Trump administration would tackle some of these issues.
Yeah, so CDT is a nonpartisan organization, and we'll work with anyone who will speak with us. I am hopeful that on some of these issues, there is just true bipartisan consensus because these are obvious, common sense, kitchen table issues. When you look at the NCII work, for example, that is fully bipartisan. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle on. People are shocked and they want to do more. When you look at questions like distributing AI resources around the country, that should also be bipartisan. When you look at efforts like the administration's memo, this OMB memo around government agency use of AI, that was part of the Biden executive order push, but it actually was mandated by a bipartisan bill that passed out of Congress, and there were elements in the Trump executive order from his administration too. So one hopes that issues like good, efficient, cost-effective, responsible use of AI by a government agency transcend party lines and would survive in either administration. At the same time, it is clear that, questions of civil rights, of enforcing of resourcing the consumer protection agencies are areas that have been stronger in the Democratic platform. And when you read the platform of the RNC, they talk about defunding some of the agencies that are just doing this critical consumer protection work. So if the election is to go in that direction, I think for us, that would be one of our primary areas, is pointing out, again, just how important and nonpartisan this enforcement work is, and making sure it's appropriately resourced.
Do you see the direction really becoming heavily focused on competition with China and the national security implications of AI? And do you see that taking away from some of these other issues that we're discussing?
I think that one's actually hard to gamify on the outcome of the election, because the Biden administration's been taking competition with China incredibly seriously and leaning into these national security considerations. There are elements of some Republican leaders who lean into those issues and others who don't quite as strongly. So that one, as sometimes happens in tech issues, doesn't seem to be party lines. I think my advocacy point to whoever is listening is we need to do both. We can lean into competition, and the way the US can lead the world is through responsible AI innovation. And really the way that we succeed from a competitive perspective is if we're developing this technology responsibly, transparently, and well. And that involves accountability and doing it that way, building it right from the start.
Yeah. What's your read on the biggest difference in tech policy regulation between Biden and Harris?
Between Biden and Harris, so I was listening backstage to what Assad just said. So far we have seen them joined at the hip in the advocacy that we have been doing. I was fortunate to attend a roundtable that the vice president convened last year with civil rights leaders, consumer advocacy groups, groups representing American workers and older Americans. And you can tell that she is deeply focused on how AI is impacting people's rights. We went to do this NCII work around the VAWA 30th anniversary. President Biden, of course, is the author of the Violence Against Women Act. Vice President Harris started the first VAWA task force focused on NCII back in 2015. So I'm there looking at, Harris transcripts from doing this work that I was trying to organize companies to do work, and it turns out the Vice President Harris had been doing it 9 years earlier. She was ahead of the curve in terms of the public work on this. So they clearly have been united, and my hope is, if it is them in office, that they keep up the work of the AI executive order and the cross-sectoral approach they've taken so far. Because while there's been really good foundation laid in this administration, no matter who's in office next, there's a lot more work to do.
Yeah, and they are very similar in their approach, but it is a new administration, and it's, Harris doesn't have an opportunity to maybe take things further. Is there a specific ask that CDT would have for whichever the new administration is?
Yeah, so what we've seen in this AI executive order, to my mind, it had two really important features to it. One is this notion that you need a cross-government solution of every different sector thinking about how AI is going to impact its stakeholders. So you need Health and Human Services doing their analysis of AI in healthcare. You need the Department of Labor looking at the use of AI in the workplace. You need the FTC doing their consumer protection work. But a lot of this initial step was guidance, and then beginning to think through kind of reports and studies and early guidance. The next wave is, well, where are the gaps in existing law? What do the legislative changes need to look like? And where is there room for either rules or regulations or just enforcement actions that help people start to understand the good from the bad and how they make decisions? So that's kind of the phase two, is that meaningful implementation and resourcing that comes from this strong foundation. And then, of course, the other aspect is the government's own use of AI and continuing to build on the really important work there, too.
All right. Well, that is all of the time that we have. Thank you so much, Alexandra.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Introducing our View from the Top moderator and Axios publisher, Nicholas Johnston.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you all for braving a little bit of weather to join us on this fine day to talk about AI. We're very grateful for you all being here. We're also hugely grateful for all of the partners of Axios. They make everything that we do possible. Our investments in journalism, these kinds of events, the great snacks here as well. So hugely big thanks to Fathom for being tonight's sponsor. And I'd like to welcome for a View from the Top conversation, Fathom's Chief Strategic Officer, Andrew Friedman. Andrew, welcome to the Axios stage. Good morning. So let's start a little big picture. Who are you? What are you doing here? Tell us a little bit about Fathom.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm Andrew Friedman. I'm the Chief Strategic Officer of Fathom. I've been working in emerging policy issues for the last decade of my life. Most notably, I was Colorado's first cannabis czar and oversaw the first regulatory system for Colorado, but I've also been working in issues of youth use online and app fairness. Fathom's mission is to help society successfully transition into a world of AI, which we believe is going to be a really hard task. To us, that means bringing the rest of society to the table, to the policy table, to have this discussion, not just the usual suspects that you would see at any tech policy debate. We fundamentally believe three things. One is AI is going to be hugely transformative in the world. We're not future predictors on that. We're not saying we know that this will be a utopia or that this will be a dystopia. Yeah. But it is not hard to see that if you follow this technology to its endpoint, it is going to have a fundamental change in our economy and our society. Our second belief is that how we transition into that world will be the single biggest policy debate of our lifetime. And that it is going to fundamentally affect every different committee in Congress, every hometown in people's districts, and society in general. And our third biggest belief is that we're only going to get this right if it is a truly big tent discussion for what needs to happen there. Assad said at the beginning of this that doing big things is hard. And we believe not only is AI policymaking going to be hard, it's going to be hard a lot of times. That there's no omnibus bill on AI that is going to suddenly solve all of this. That what we legislate, regulate, self-regulate 1 year might be totally wrong, and we're going to have to switch it for the next iteration of technology. And so we believe we have to build the muscle to being able to constantly bring the rest of society to the table to meaningfully inform where this goes.
Right, so it's not solved in one fell swoop with one discussion. This is going to be animating these kind of discussions for years, the rest of our lives.
I mean, AI is going to look different in 3 years, right? And the short and medium term consequences of how that looks different is going to affect people's day-to-day lives. And so we have to be able to reach into a broad tent of stakeholder engagement over and over again in order to inform.
Right. So we've had lots of AI discussions, and I can tell you that the big tech companies show up, the big firms show up. Yep. Tell us how you want to widen that circle. What you mean when you talk about like society engagement?
Yeah, I think it is really easy to be kind of hand wavy about society engagement, right? When I was cannabis czar in Colorado, we were very concerned about home grows. People were growing hundreds of plants in their home. And I was upset about how hard it was to get law enforcement to come to the policy table and talk about what needed to happen. Until a local sheriff sat me down. He said, there's essentially 4 reasons why it's so hard to bring us to the table. First, we have day jobs. We have other stuff we have to do. This is a time and effort issue. Second, we lack the current context. Like, we all know this is a problem, but I'm not deep in the weeds of policy around cannabis, so I don't know why people can grow 100 plants at home. And then third, even if I got all the way up there, I'm just one voice, and I could walk into, which is the fourth point, a legislative hearing on this, and I'm going to get beat up by the cannabis lobby because I'm just one person standing alone. So Fathom really wants to solve all of those issues in order to have meaningful stakeholder engagement. The first is we have to actually actively listen to what people want to see here, what their hopes and dreams of, but also how they want to see things implemented. So today, and part of why we thought it would be so great to sponsor this event, we're releasing our first report on this, which is AI at a Crossroads, which was 2 national polls, hundreds of hours of qualitative research and listening tours, focus groups, individual.
It's talking to like real normal people about this.
Real normal people, as well as kind of grass tops and grassroots stakeholders in this issue, and getting their vision of what needs to go right in this. So you have to go and listen to them, and then second, you have to then start to convene them in interesting ways. And so, for instance, we will be holding the Ashby workshops in January that then actively invites those groups who don't typically show up to an event like this but say like the After School Alliance and groups that will be day-to-day impacted by AI, and bring them into a conversation with the people who are always there and help them start to sense make. Third is to then consensus build amongst those groups, because they don't want to come alone and argue in front of Congress about what needs to happen, but they have to be a collective voice about where they go. And I'd say the last part is then you actually do have to influence Congress. Like, they do have to then be able to see that their voices matter, and that when they reach conclusions and wish to push forward with those things, they can actually get somewhere.
Yeah. So the report, people can dig in. They're available on iPads, I think, right out here. Yeah, I can see a couple of them there. In the research, though, you write a little bit about like a Silicon Valley, Washington disconnect. So unpack what that is, where that gap is.
Yeah. So first of all, I think the biggest finding, which it may be not as exciting to people here, but you kind of wonder what things are going to look like if you take 2 steps out of Silicon Valley and you take 2 steps out of Washington. But I will tell you, AI is definitely in the zeitgeist. People, I mean, they report hearing about this more than they're hearing about really big national federal issues like Social Security. But the second part of that is they are deeply ambivalent about the technology right now. A third of them are excited, a third of them are concerned, and then literally a third of them just don't know what to make out of this.
Right.
And I think there's a warning sign there, first for the actual AI industry, which is you can, the Silicon Valley mantra is go fast and break things. And we're saying that's actually a really bad idea here. If you dig into the data about how quickly people can be very concerned about it, you have to go moderately and fix things here.
Right.
And
that middle third needs to understand it.
They need to understand it, or the industry really does risk a huge backlash here of populist anger about kind of all the changes they have to go through if they're not brought in on the change. The good news is when you dig into the public, actually, from the people who are excited to the people who are concerned, very quickly have focused on key issues that they want Congress to tackle. They say, we want you to ensure the election integrity, we want you to protect against misinformation, we want you to protect against fraud, we want you to protect copyright infringement. It's all in the report, but there's a very clear what we call Overton window, which is a big word, which is a term in AI, that are substantive guardrails that they want to see. And then the last big point in that is this is as bipartisan or nonpartisan as it gets. If you look at the data and you cut it along the lines of, look through the crosstabs of it, which I'm happy to brief anybody on the crosstabs on it, it does not break by ideology, it breaks by age, which is super interesting, right? But Republicans and Democrats both see a need for government intervention and guardrails here, and both don't think government alone is up for the task.
So, that almost gets to that point. You mentioned there's a third of people who are kind of ambivalent. It's cut across both lines of the aisle. The report mentions a crossroads. It seems like the crossroads is, where does that third that's ambivalent go? Do they go to people who are excited and interested in this, or do they turn on the technology?
So I would throw out that here's the 2 different visions that we have in the world. The first is that third feels disempowered, and it feels like AI happens to them, right? In that world, kind of all the bumps you come across in the way, they feel like it's stealing artists' work. They feel like it's creating a whole bunch of misinformation. They feel like society is becoming more isolated and more disconnected, and they feel like they don't have a say in where this goes. That, I think, you're going to end up seeing a lot of people pushing back on AI technology and going really for more populist-like policies. The second is they feel like they're being brought along and really truly engaging here, that they see artists using it as a tool, but they don't necessarily feel like artists are being abused in it, that they feel like it's helping people's jobs and not replacing people's jobs. Right. And in that world, I think they can continue to come to the table and help create policy with our policymakers.
So there's an opportunity here to bring those people along.
I think it's more than just an opportunity. I think if we don't do this, if we don't do big tent policy making here, we will actually see a very fractured America go through the AI route.
We're about to get the hook here. I also want to end on one fun thing. You've spent hundreds of hours interviewing real human Americans about AI. What's the coolest, funnest thing you heard?
So we had this focus group of people over the age of 65 and this woman, Dora, in it. And she looked like she had never seen a computer, right? Like it was hard to get her up online and talking on it. And she was kind of completely out of it for the first 5 minutes. I was like, this person's not going to add anything. And finally, she just kind of pipes up and she's like, really feels like AI could help me grow my savings account, but we should probably be worried about cybersecurity and deepfakes being able to fraud the system. And we're like, okay, Dora, can we just take you to Congress right now?
Smarter than you think.
Yeah, there you go.
That's perfect. Andrew, that's great. Thanks for Fathom for making this possible. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Please welcome to the stage Axios Pro Senior Tech Policy Reporter, Ashley Gold.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for sticking around for these great conversations on this rainy morning. And without further ado, I am going to introduce our final guest this morning. Please welcome to the stage Senator John Hickenlooper from the great state of Colorado.
Here those hoops.
All right, Senator Hickenlooper, thank you for joining us, and thank you for not skipping town on us, even though the Senate wrapped up last night. We appreciate you staying here in Washington for just a little longer. We won't forget. So let's start by just sort of a scene-setting question. We're about 2 years out from the explosion of AI into the general consciousness. The mood has swung from everything to excitement, trepidation, disappointment. What is your read on where the public is landing on AI these days and how they're feeling about it?
Well, I think they're a little frustrated that Congress has been so slow. The Pew had a poll came out last summer that said that 52% of American people were quote unquote concerned. Only 10% were excited. So that level of concern and whether caution or fear, I'm not sure which word you choose, I think that's real. I think American people look at AI as something that has great potential for good, but they very clearly see all the potential hazards that come along with AI.
And you mentioned Congress has been slow. So is it fair to say you don't think Congress has met the moment on AI yet? And what have been some of the more disappointing moments on the Hill so far when attempting to get this regulated?
Well, this is a conflict of nature. Congress has been designed and evolved to be contemplative and slow, designed to be that. And technology moves at a much faster rate, warp speed. And the evolution of the internet was moving at a snail's pace compared to what's happening with AI. In other words, it is a galloping horse right out of the gate. And we haven't been able to get out ahead of it. And we've seen, look at the social media platforms and the harm that they've done to young girls. I go down the whole list. We didn't get out there ahead of that, of those social media platforms. And they got so large that it becomes almost impossible to push through to them. They have legions of lobbyists and supporters and organized voices defending all their rights and not really worrying as much about the rights of consumers. AI is going to be an order of magnitude more risk to the public and for consumers. And I think Chuck Schumer did a great job where he brought the leaders from across all the different industries that are touched by AI and let them be asked, let them be interrogated privately, right? There weren't a bunch of TV cameras. They could actually be very candid about what they saw as the opportunities, the risks, the major concerns. And I think that was a great step in the right direction. And there are a whole number of bills now that are bubbling up that are, addressing issues around AI. I feel, let's call it a fierce urgency that we have to get transparency. Like tomorrow, people should be able to have a watermark or something when they see something on their screen that says that it is AI. If it's a video, there should maybe be some sort of a sound or a bell at the beginning and at the end of that clip so people know it's AI. But we're not there. And as the industry begins to gallop, it's hard to, and we haven't even got our spurs on.
Speaking of spurs, a lot of people think that the fact that we don't even have a comprehensive privacy bill yet to sort of underpin all of this AI talk is quite disappointing, and that we'd be a lot better off if we at least had that foundation. So you're on the Commerce Committee, you serve an important role there. What are the status of, negotiations over the American Privacy Rights Act, and can we see anything at all happen by the end of this year?
So that's one of those elusive, I feel like one of those kind of mythic stories where the grail or the treasure that's being pursued is always within grasp. Twice this year, I thought we had a deal. We've got 23 states now have passed laws to protect privacy. And Andrew Friedman, he and I worked together in Colorado, so he's like family. He'll remember back, could tell you great stories, probably did tell you great stories about the early days of marijuana, legalizing recreational marijuana, when we were the first state to do that. So he had to create a whole legal framework for how we were going to regulate this. We're in that same pioneer state, except 23 states have already passed laws. That's when Congress should move. States are the laboratories of democracy. I love that cliche as a former governor. But for that to work, as states come around and recognize and begin to carve out the appropriate territory by which you can regulate people's data, how do you begin limiting how much data is collected and preserved when the collection of the data and the preservation of the data have nothing to do with the business purpose of that technology? Those kinds of things we could easily regulate, and we haven't done it.
Are there any misconceptions you personally had about AI and how it works or what it can and can't do a year or two ago that has changed in the past 2 years up on the Hill talking about this?
I did have a obvious misperception, and I thought that we would move more quickly for some of the basics, like transparency. I think President Biden got out there quickly and said, all right, we're going to do this voluntary program. Here's what it could look like. And there are an awful lot of good actors that are playing by the rules of that voluntary system. That being said, we should go faster. And I am very sensitive to the argument that we're in a competition, a rivalry with China and to a lesser extent Iran and Russia, that we don't want to hamstring our companies so that they are at a disadvantage in that competition for global advantage. Because AI and quantum computing are the two technologies that have the potential to transform everything. Both of them separately are game changers. And we have to make sure that we win that global competition. But at the same time, we've got to have a regulatory framework that protects our consumers. And that's the alchemy of how that reaction works is very, very complex, and historically takes a long period of time. We don't have time. I think it's really got to happen in the next 6 months to 12 months. We've got to, build that basic foundation of regulatory frameworks from which we can let our industries go out and compete can succeed in the global competition.
So we're looking at a potential, flip of the Senate, maybe the White House, maybe the House. And we know that at least over in the House, leadership is not all that excited about really regulating AI. They want to sort of just see what happens, not hamper innovation, which is, similar to what you were saying, but it sounds like they don't want to do a whole lot. What do you think of the Republican argument that if they do regulate it at all, you're going to immediately lose your shot to compete with China and you're going to hamper innovation?
Well, I was trying to head that question off in my previous answer.
Sorry.
I believe in the competition and the importance of winning that rivalry, but I don't think having fundamental regulations is germane. In other words, that's not going to in any way handicap the companies that are either in the United States or in our allied countries. The real victory there is going to be as they are, creating the new technologies and really the new applications. Things like transparency, I see no way that is going to in any way diminish their ability to carve out new territory and expand their technology to do more things. Get rid of some of the so-called hallucinations and the errors within the technology. Perfecting that's going to be a big part of making people trust it and believe in it. And again, having some regulation, I do worry. Well, first, the Senate's not going to flip. Just so you can all say you heard it here first. John Tester's going to win in Montana. They are not going to flip.
You said it.
And I also don't think that Donald Trump's going to win the White House. That said, that shouldn't matter in terms of how we regulate these industries. It's too big a deal. It's too important for us to sit back complacently and saying, well, we'll win this election or we'll lose that election. Both sides should recognize that without some regulatory framework, we're heading for a colossal catastrophe.
So speaking of election season, when you are home in Colorado and you're talking to your constituents and you're talking to voters, do they bring up AI? Is this something that they're worried about? Do you hear about it?
Depends on where I am, but no matter where I am, someone brings up AI. And if I'm in Boulder, Colorado, it's usually the first question that's asked. If I'm in Grand Junction, Colorado, or if I'm out on the Eastern Plains in a rural setting, it's maybe the third or fourth question that's asked. But everybody's paying attention to it. It's, regardless of the age. I mean, I grew up with, science fiction stories about AI running amok, taking over everything. All of us now have been exposed to those stories most of our lives. So it doesn't take too much fear-mongering to get people into what my grandmother used to call a swivet, which is kind of part sweat and part your head spins around. Speaking of science fiction stories, I think we've got to recognize that there's a cause of that the anxiety that people feel is almost universal around AI. But it can't get in the anxiety can't get in the way of recognizing the benefits and the potential. You step back and look at one thing like cancer cures. And AI, down the road, and I'm not talking 10 years down the road, but in a matter of a couple of years, has a high potential they're going to be able to look through so many reams of data that they're going to discover issue or examples and applications of different pharmaceuticals or even different fundamental changes in our lifestyles that will have great beneficial effects in terms of our public health.
So back to the Hill for a bit. You introduced the VET AI Act. You also introduced a framework of sorts for regulating AI. What is the status of the VET AI Act, and are you hoping to see it placed in a must-pass bill by the end of the year? Yeah,
so VET AI, which, and again, I don't come up with the acronyms, but it's basically validation, and the idea is to get the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, NIST, to be part of creating standards by which AI technology can be, the companies who are using it can demonstrate and can pass muster that they are testing, before it goes in front of the public, they're testing and making sure that there are not examples of bias, racial preference, or any kind of preference, that they are protected against deep fakes and other abuses of AI. And the VET Act, we passed out of committee last summer in July. Again, I have a sense of urgency about each of these things. I mean, the sooner we can get an organization like NIST, which a big part of what NIST does is they create standards for everything. That's why it's the National Institute of Standards. If we want to have standards for AI, NIST is a great place to start. And part of what they also do is they can help other nonprofits or other companies be part of that creation of the standards and then the implementation and holding companies to these standards once you get them passed. It's one thing to have the standards in place, but it's another thing to make sure that you have the proper capability to make sure that they're enforced. And I believe we can get it passed in the lame duck, famous last words, but this is an issue of national security. It's something that is in real time, has a measure of urgency that hopefully the rest of Congress will recognize.
And with that measure of urgency, we are actually out of time.
I think we should recognize it's very the high level, the high aptitude that Axios has shown by making sure that Ashley, this is her last interview before she goes off to bring a new life into the world, and yet we're talking about AI.
Thank you, Senator.
The perfect
Thank you.
confluence of nature.
Yeah. I'm glad to be here. and again, glad you didn't skip town, because that would have made this a little more sad. But yes, it is all the time we have, and we thank you for your time, Senator Hickenlooper. Thank you to our audience for attending. And a reminder, if you don't already, please follow our continued coverage of AI via Axios and Axios Pro. To sign up for any of our newsletters, especially mine and Maria's newsletter, visit Axios.com and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Nice job.